Great. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I know that we're all joining from all over the place, but part of what's important to us is to recognize where we are all connecting from. And so, though we're connected by the internet, we are all located in particular places. And so, I want to recognize that Shelley and I are calling in from the Coast Salish lands, specifically the Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo and Swatson First Nations people who continue to care for and sustain this land. I invite you to look at where you're calling from. So looking at the history of your land, which has an impact on how we place ourselves and how we understand how we've come to be in this land as well, and the history of ourselves as well as the people that have been here before us. So we start with that.
Okay, thank you so much, Shalima. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Vidal, and I just want to take a few minutes to share the history behind the name Kaiso Careers. So Shalima and I we're both born in Canada, and our parents are both from Trinidad and Tobago. And it's with that background of our parents being from the Caribbean that we decided we wanted to incorporate some of our culture into this work that we do right now. So the name Kaiso or Calypso comes from the influences of chutney, soul, funk, Latin music that was established in the 19th century. And it's actually indigenous to West Africa. So oftentimes back in the day when people were enslaved, they would use music as a way to communicate with one another. And so there was the use of trickery kind of, or sly messages that were made through the songs. And it's actually quite neat if you take some time to do a little research on the history behind the name. Feel free to Google it if you want. So that's a little bit about that. I personally work full-time as an instructor at one of the colleges in Vancouver. In addition to that, I have this here that Shalima and I are working on, and I also am connected with another organization called Sisters Leading Sisters, and I volunteer with the National Congress of Black Women Foundation as well. So those are a few things that I do. And for me, the biggest thing that I like to do is to help amplify our voices in any capacity that we can, because oftentimes we are, historically speaking, you know, we've been kind of just waiting for someone to acknowledge the work that we are doing. So Shalima and I decided, you know what, it's time for us to start amplifying the voices of BIPOC folks, and that kind of led us to do the work that we're doing today. So Shalima, do you want to chat a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So yes, my name is Shalima Cambridge. My primary work is in leadership development. I work at a health authority here in the Lower Mainland. But outside of that, I also do EDI work. So I work as a consultant with HRX. We do a lot of EDI assessments and understanding what it looks like, what the lay of the land is for organizations, and so that they can better themselves and creating an inclusive environment. And that's really led to a lot of the work that I want to do in this space, which is providing an opportunity for BIPOC folks to really share what their experiences are. And so now that we're all on camera, I want to introduce our guests for today, who's Natasha Jung and Nataizya Mukwavi. And I'd like to hear from you. What do you want people to know about you? So perhaps we'll start with Natasha. What do you want people to know about you?
Oh gosh, maybe it's, I feel like sometimes I'm a bit of an open book, especially in the last few years. I've been pretty vocal about just things that are important to me, but so maybe the question is, what do I not want people to know about me? No, just kidding. Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit about myself is I'm a multidisciplinary creative. I've worked in marketing, media, education, but ultimately throughout all these different career transitions that I've had, which I understand we'll be talking about a little bit more throughout this event, what's really guided me is just my interest in people and storytelling. And I think, you know, what really resonates with me about what Kaiso Careers is doing is around amplifying voices of people who maybe don't have a platform to be able to do that. And whether that be through marketing or my media work, that's essentially been a main driver for me in my career. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Also, fun fact, I'm very pregnant right now. I'm expected to give birth in the next month. I also just moved into a new home just before this call. This background looked very different, and my fellow hosts and guest speakers saw me cleaning it up. But yeah, just very, very glad to be on this call today, and looking forward to hopefully hearing from some of the attendees on this event today as well. So thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks, Natasha. Nataizya.
So yes, my name is Nataizya Mukwavi, and what do I want people to know about me? I feel like I'm the opposite. I'm maybe more of like laid back kind of person, and I can be highly introverted or I can be highly extroverted. So then sometimes people just don't really know what to do with me, because they'll see me in a situation where I was very interactive, and the next time they see me, I'm very quiet. And so I think that that's something that people should know about me. And I don't know, do I talk about what I do, or are we doing that later?
Sure, we could get into a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so I am the founding executive director of Black Women Connect Vancouver, which started in 2017. And really it just started actually out of something that it was fun that was my sister and I were doing. We're like, oh, let's hang out with some of our Black girlfriends. And then we realized, I'm like, oh, they have Black girlfriends, let's invite them. And then it just kind of grew into what it is now. And I was actually in the process of developing something else for women, and it was kind of all inclusive. And then when I did my very first event downtown, which Shelly actually attended, it was a mental health panel, and it really kind of spurred out of a moment for me where I was kind of trying to figure out what mental health looked like for Black women. And so it was something I was just kind of struggling with. And then I was like, I'm sure there's other Black women struggling with it. And it was great. I think about 70 women showed up. And so it was a great time. And then I think after that, I was like, wow, this is a really big need in our community that I think I kind of underestimated. And for my 9-to-5 job, I'm an executive director of a nonprofit here in Surrey. And so those are just like two of the things that I'm involved in right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's wonderful. Yeah, that was a fabulous event. For me, being able to walk into this room with, like you said, about 70 Black women who were from multiple generations was such a powerful experience and very affirming. As the panel spoke, and you would see them nodding their heads or saying, oh yeah, absolutely, right? So yes, great work. One of the first questions that we have for you all is, how do you marry success and authenticity on your own terms? So while you're doing the work on your own terms. Whoever would like to take this one first, jump on.
I think, what's helpful there is to kind of define, what does on your own terms mean for you? So mean different things for different people. So what does that actually mean for you? And then how do you do that?
Yeah, I can go. So a little bit about kind of a little bit of background as to how I am framing my response here is I mentioned that I'm a multidisciplinary creative. So worked in a number of different fields, changed careers like so many different times. So currently I work as a senior brand and communications manager at Fresh Prep, which is a local Vancouver-based meal kit company. That's my day job, my 9-to-5. But I've also been working on my media startup, Cold Tea Collective. You can see it behind me. I guess it's reversed in the camera.
No, it's perfect.
Oh, okay, perfect. Great. So yeah, Cold Tea Collective is a media company for, by, and about Asian millennials, sharing our stories, amplifying our voices across North America. And so I've been working on that for 5 years. Our team has really grown quite a bit. In that time, we have contributors, writers, team members, other creatives involved across, like North America. So it's not just based in Vancouver, which is pretty cool. But I mean, like, kind of going back to the original question here is, I think, first to define on your own terms, I think to me, what that means is being able to cut through the clutter of what society's expectations are of you, or what you think that they might be. And I think that actually, working from home and this, like this pandemic we're all going through together, has really helped clarify that a lot for me. That plus, I think the benefit of, having worked for a little bit longer now, being more confident in who I am. So to me, that's, on your own terms is being able to define, success in a way that is, I guess, natural to you. And that leads into, I guess, the bigger question of, how do you, marry that with authenticity? I don't think success can be achieved without authenticity, to be honest with you. For me, I've been very fortunate to have worked in the last couple of years in workplaces where I felt like I could bring my whole self to work, but also, push myself, challenging myself to grow and learning new things as well. But yeah, I think to me, like as I got older and worked a little bit longer, I realized that being myself and doing work that matters to me, work that energizes me, is what success means.
Thanks, Natasha. Nataizya, how about you?
Yeah, I think it would be something similar to that. I think for me, I have a very high expectations of myself. It's not even necessarily, I kind of don't care what people think of me, but for myself, I'm more very like, okay, I should be here. I should be here. And I think just having to work the word even should of why do I feel like I should be doing these things and kind of the expectations I have for myself. And I think I had to learn to redefine that for myself of what does success look like for me personally? When will I feel successful? And I think, like we said, you can't do either or if you're not authentic. And I try to as much run with integrity and character and things like that. And so for me, that is how I kind of define my success. Am I following those things? Am I continuing walking through all the things that I actually truly value in life and value in human experience and our stories and our journey? And I think that anytime I feel like I'm not either speaking up for other people or highlighting other Black women in the situation that I'm in, or not walking with integrity, or my values don't align with what I'm actually doing, then I feel like I'm not being successful. And so that's to me how I marry the two, because you can't do work like this unless you truly care for people, because then it becomes about you, right? And the whole point of starting something where it's a collective for voices to be heard and it becomes about your voice, then you're not being successful. And that's when things usually crumble, because it's losing focus of valuing human stories.
Yeah. I want to pick up on one of the things that both of you shared, or a word that came up in what both of you shared was expectations. And, I know for myself, my family has expectations. I come up with my own expectations of myself. There might be cultural aspects to the expectations I think I should have for myself or what others have of me. And I'm curious to hear how this word expectations has come, like what role that has played for you. Have you pushed against expectations? Have you gone with them your own? Like, yeah, how does this play for you?
I think for me, growing up in an African household, there is very much a lot of expectations on who you should be, what kind of schooling you should do. Are you becoming anything in the medical field? Will you be okay? Will you be taking care of your parents at a certain age? So there's definitely a lot of expectations, which I do feel a lot of other kind of nationalities feel the same way. So for me, I had to learn that of kind of pushing those expectations, but at the same time, you always have that in the back of your mind of like, I want to make my parents proud, or I want to make sure that I am successful for them to feel that they will be taken care of. And I think for me, those expectations kind of run rampant through what I do, because obviously if you start doing a startup in the middle of your 30s, there's like, are you really preparing to take care of your parents? So I think for me, those are kind of things that I always have to push through. But my parents are actually great in terms of always making sure that we're passionate about what we do. They did push that a lot, as much as they still were like, try to have these like structural values around you. They still were like, you have to be passionate about what you do or you'll be miserable. And so that's something I think all like my sisters and I did try to make sure we push. I mean, they obviously push the kind of like normal societal norms of like, become a nurse, you'll be okay, like do this. And it's like, oh, like it would be terrible. So like, I think there was times there was that disappointment and then you kind of feel that too, but then you're like, I know I would be miserable. But I think as they see us growing in our journey, it's led me to also learn to let go of the expectations. And I think out of that, I've learned that I'm a high performance person, which I never thought I would be. And I know it comes from there. I remember sitting in like a therapy session about like work experience and kind of leadership. And she's like, do you realize like all these things stem from that? And even though I don't feel like my parents have those expectations, I've actually taken that into how I function today in situations. And I think that's where the should comes from, or the I should be doing this, or this is where I should be, even though people can be like we celebrated our 3-year anniversary for Black Women Connect, and I was still like, oh, we're not where we need to be. Like I couldn't even celebrate the small little win, and everyone's like, this is a great accomplishment, and I was just like, but we should be here. And it's just like realizing I become so high performing that it comes out of those expectations we don't even realize we are kind of underlining, and then when you kind of reflect, you're like, that's where it comes from.
And it's almost like not giving ourselves permission to just enjoy where we're at this moment, and see the accomplishments that we have had so far, and just kind of revel in that, right? It takes away some of that joy. Yeah. Natasha, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really like what you said there, especially around like family expectations. And I think on a general basis, you'll see that a lot in Asian families as well. So it's really cool to hear, across like BIPOC, cultures, communities, families specifically, that these expectations can kind of sit in the back of our minds. And I say this like cautiously, but not cautiously, because both my parents are on this call right now too. But no, I mean, they're great supporters and such too. But I feel like even like when it comes to family expectations, it's maybe, trying to break that down a little bit more. I feel like maybe some of those expectations are ones I just placed upon myself, even if like my family or parents or people around me never explicitly said it. And so I think when it comes to pushing against expectations or letting go of them, I realized that a lot of that was like self-inflicted or self-induced. And it wasn't until I went through a bit of a career breakdown to get me to a career breakthrough to be able to figure out like, wow, like I did this to myself. It didn't have to be this way. This is, I did a TED talk for TEDx SFU, and I see Amy on this call today, who was part of that as well. So hey, Amy. So I did a talk about that specifically and how you kind of move beyond some of those expectations. But it wasn't until that I kind of felt like I hit rock bottom that I really learned to question why. Like, why do I have these expectations upon myself? And being also former career advisor myself, one of the things I would teach my students is ask yourself why. Ask yourself why, not just once, but ask yourself why 5 times. So if you're being faced with a challenge, and this is something I need to do better for myself as well, is ask yourself, why am I being challenged by this? What doesn't sit right with me? And ask yourself, once you get that answer, ask yourself why to, up into maybe like 5 times, and you get down to the root of it. And so every single time that's happened for me, I realize it's something that I did to myself. So, being able to see past that now, I think has been really beneficial. Not to say that other expectations maybe of like your employer, for example, or, society in general might not have real impacts, but, as an individual, you have to figure out the why, but also how much does that matter to you? Do you actually care that much to the point where like it's going to affect your life? That's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, that's absolutely on point. And I think it's so important that you all mentioned the role that our families sometimes play, because our parents, ultimately, they want the best for us, right? So they do want to encourage us and push us. And I think what you said, Natasha, is so on point where, we can look across all lines. I think when we think of the BIPOC community, and for many of us whose parents have immigrated to Canada, part of the reason why they immigrated to this country is because they wanted a better life, right? So when we look at that over generations, there's that constant push, which is lovingly, of course, right? We know that, but they want better, right? And so that often kind of manifests in different ways, so that yeah, we might be extremely high achieving or put that additional stress on ourselves because because our parents have instilled this idea that we can do better, thus we should do better. And then we do better, right? So it was, I just really like how you both have, similar ideas on that same concept, which takes us to the next question. And from your perspectives, how do you draw upon your culture to find your strengths and what you do on in your work. Because again, thinking back to where your family comes from and what they've instilled on you, they've also given you a great amount of strength. So based on that culture that you walk in this world with, how does that allow you to walk with strength and purpose?
I think for me, resilience, like learning to be resilient has been something I think I have had mirrored for me. And I think I don't realize that I actually learned to do it in what I do, just in general, anytime like life throws things at you. I mean, there's obviously days that you'll just choose to wallow and eat food in bed, you know what I mean? But in terms of like actually like pushing through every kind of barrier that's put out there, either it'd be a job situation, either be like racial inequality or all these things that kind of keep pushing at you. I think watching, like you said, your parents being immigrants in a country where so much was pushed back at them, you learned that unintentionally, I think. And so I think for me, that's one thing I realized, learning to be resilient. I think that I do notice I'm in situations where others don't really have that. And I kind of get like confused because I'm like, oh, just push through it, like blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, oh, wait, like they don't have that same experience when you watch that, you know what I mean? And not that I'm saying that they maybe didn't have parents that weren't resilient, but that kind of cultural background is very much kind of instilled with us unintentionally. And so I think that for me, resilient for sure, learning how to do that.
Yeah, I love what you said there about resilience. That's definitely something I've picked up, not only from, I guess, like family and other maybe like mentors throughout my life and career, but I think with that as well, I think drawing upon like my culture, it's maybe not necessarily my culture, but it's the strength of the community, whether it be, you know, a community based on like similar interests or, you know, similar like background, upbringing, even like geographical community. Being able to rely on community has been really uplifting and has really guided kind of my own journey and purpose. With that, so specifically when it comes to storytelling with Cold Tea Collective, for example, we do articles, sometimes we have podcasts and video as well, but just always going into it with the mindset of, hey, like we're sharing these stories to not only amplify voices within the community, but also to let people that they're not alone, to let them know that they're not the only ones going through this particular, you know, situation. And, you know, people have gotten, you know, through the thick of it, and this is how they did it, or maybe they're still processing it, but just being open to sharing those stories, I think has really, you know, helped me learn and appreciate that community as well. So, and with that too, I think it can be very, it can be scary, like putting yourself out there and, you know, sharing your story. But, you know, that's why I'm also just like so grateful for this event and the people in this virtual room right now, because it feels like it's a safe space. Whereas maybe in other communities or spaces, I don't think I'd be willing to be as vulnerable, because I feel like I might have to save a little face. Yeah, I see some head nods and stuff too. But yeah, no, with that, it's, you know, drawing upon the culture, like overall, like a culture of like openness and sharing and vulnerability, I think is really important. And that's what strengthens me personally.
Yeah. I mean, like it's taken me a while to learn that there's strength in vulnerability, and also knowing when you can be, because there are some spaces where I've never felt that I could be vulnerable. So to your point, Natasha, like knowing when you're in a space of community, of welcome, of being able to be open, but then realizing that sometimes there's spaces where even if you're not comfortable, it's in service for you to be vulnerable, for you to be able to share those stories, right? And to push yourself a little bit to do that when it's uncomfortable, and what that connection could be created through that. So I thank you for, you know, coming and sharing your stories here, because you know, that's what we want to be able to do, is to create that space for that. And I'd love to hear like from people, you know, who are listening in. If this resonates with you, please share your comments in there. We want to hear from you and see what's hitting you, what's sitting with you as we're chatting. And we're going to get a chance to hear from you a little bit later as well. So please do share your thoughts as our wonderful panelist is talking. I wanted to pick up on, you know, a piece of that vulnerability as well. And both of you talked about transition. So Natasha, you talked about a career breakdown and moving from there. Nataizya, you talked about, like doing a startup in your mid-30s and how that could be quite scary too. And both of you have that experience of new ventures. So I'd be curious to hear more about that. Like, how did you transition? What was your impetus for making transition? What was that, that drawstring that pulled you out into something new?
Sure, I can go first. I think for me, I describe myself as a bit of a reluctant entrepreneur, if you will. I think I've always been intrapreneurial. So whenever I worked at a job, I'd always, propose new ideas and, try new things and such. But then when it came to, founding Cold Tea Collective about 5 years ago, as I mentioned, it kind of came from me being in a place of like, wow, like I was in a really terrible situation at a previous role, ended up, losing my job because I wasn't able to perform. I wasn't able to perform because I wasn't doing work that fulfilled me. So just being like completely transparent around that, I took some time for myself to try to figure out what actually mattered to me. And one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was work in television. So at that time, I was working as a TV producer and host. One of the events that I was covering was the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. And never really thought about Asian representation on screen like before that, to be honest with you. I was just kind of going about like my corporate marketing career before that. But then what I saw on screen like, really struck me. And that's where I really learned that, seeing stories that are representative of your personal experience or the experiences of people that can be truly powerful. And so I decided, I'm gonna share my story about, the job loss thing. And then, with that, people said, wow, I went through the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. And just building that community around storytelling and vulnerability led me to believe that there was something more that could be done. So it's been, as I said, 5 years now, but it was only within the last like year and a bit where we started to get actual paying clients for Cold Tea Collective. We actually recently just finished a campaign with Dove and Refinery 29 a couple months ago to, share the unique experiences of Asian Canadian women and their just kind of their approach to life, body confidence and self-esteem. And so I guess, with that, I never really thought that we could, partner with organizations or brands that large and at this point, but it's been really cool. I think before that, I was really reluctant to say I was an entrepreneur because I think that sometimes we just need that external validation, like, oh, someone's willing to pay me to do this. So that means now I'm a business, now I'm an entrepreneur. But I think just once again, like it's always being driven by my belief in that this could be something bigger and it could be of benefit to other people. That being said, of course, I do also have the safety net of the full-time day job. Before that, I was also contracting at the same time. But at the end of the day, pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And not that I necessarily set out to be an entrepreneur, but I knew that I just had to do something and accidentally became an entrepreneur. That's my story.
Great, thanks, Natasha.
I would have the exact similar story in that way. It was definitely accidental. It was not planned. So I feel like I still have a hard time saying it, like saying like, oh yeah, I'm an entrepreneur, all these things, just because I don't know if I fit the mold of what it is out there, I guess. But yeah, that's something I'm learning to kind of navigate through right now. But yeah, I think for me, every time I would see people's stories of like, oh, I had this plan of this business or all these things that I wanted to do. And they had this like set plan and their business proposals and all these things. And I was just like, ooh, this started very organically. And, and then I realized I'm like, there's a lot more women that feel this way of like just starting a business out of like passion, right? And we don't talk about that enough. It's kind of like, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to have this schedule. You need to have your 5-year plan. You need to have your 10-year plan. You need to have these connections. And I'm just kind of like building it now. And so I'm realizing there are a lot more people feel this way of like, this kind of just started out of passion and then grew into what it is now, which I didn't expect, which actually is a way more, not, it's beautiful because you grow in the process of that. You didn't plan it. And so you as a person get to evolve with it as it grows, right? Whether it fails or it's successful and it's different areas of things that you launch, you're still launching it. And that in that moment right there is like that vulnerability we talked about of like your baby being like, oh, let me put this out there, but it might be hated by all, but it might be loved by all. And it's like that risk that you're kind of like always putting through in your mind of like, is this the right timing? Is it not the right timing? And I think for me, that's something that I'm kind of learning right now of like that vulnerability of like, okay, if I launch this, like, ugh. So I think I'm just learning that right now. And I think that I'm also learning to be comfortable with like, it was organic and it wasn't planned. So yeah, because sometimes we can go to like seminars and things like that, and everyone's like talking about their experiences, or they're like, I got $10,000 from this company because they loved my business proposal. And I'm like, ooh, what am I doing wrong? But then you realize like, this is just a different journey, right? And so that's just something that we have to remember.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you just mentioned that it is a different journey, right? We're not all expected to walk the same path. We are all on unique paths. And I think what you and Natasha both mentioned was so on point when you mentioned that you didn't necessarily fit the mold, right, of what others were doing. And the work that you're doing now really grew out of this passion, right? And I think that's what is so important when we think of entrepreneurs, right? The whole idea of being an entrepreneur is because you will do this work for free if you needed to, because you're so passionate about it, right? And I think that that's often just kind of not acknowledged, and it's important, right? And as we do this work, sometimes starting off for free, it really evolves, and you can see the excitement as the community builds and the aha moments. And it's like, yes, 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 absolutely, right? And it's beautiful. It's so organic and beautiful. And, you know, I think, yeah, it's so powerful what you both shared. So I think the next question I want to ask is, how can you intentionally continue to forge careers that are aligned with who you really are? Like, how do you make that a conscious effort?
I think for me, and I'd spoken about this week actually, and I think I didn't realize how important it was. I remember taking a leadership class, and he very much stressed the importance of having a mission statement or life mission statement, right? And for me, I'm just kind of like, why are we writing all this? Like, you're kind of like scribbling whatever. And it's like, you have to add your values, you have to add who you are. Like, what is it that you're offering? Because so many times we're taught like, here's your resume, make sure you sell yourself, sell yourself, sell yourself. But we never actually talk about who you are and what you value. And then that aligns with a company's value or the person you want to connect with, right? Because a person will connect with you on the value scale. They won't connect with you on your resume. Like, we all have different experiences. We all have things that we can throw out there and be like, I've accomplished this, this, this. Like, that's cool. But I want to work with you because of this, this, and this, right? Like, who you are as a person and what you bring. And so I think that that's something I'm learning to do better at too, of like, not having to say that, but this is what I value. What is it that you value at your company? Or what is it that you value in this connection or this partnership or this collaboration for this to work, right? And if it doesn't work out, that's cool, because then you can pass it on to someone else who you know their values, and then be like, I think this would be a great partnership for you two, and then marry the two for them, right? So it's learning to do that with yourself, but then also doing it for others, so they have that connection.
Like listening to Nataizia's like, you know, response, but also looking at the side chat, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many great ideas and conversations happening right now. And Shalima and I are on a board together. So she always knows I'm like always in the slide chat, but I'm like, oh shoot, I have to talk about you. Yeah, so maybe just kind of first to answer the question around how we can intentionally forge careers that are aligned with who you are. About 4 years into working professionally, like full time, I remember sitting in an International Women's Day kind of like seminar at a very corporate job that I had, and just sitting there in that seminar and asking myself, like, what are the things that I value, like as a person, right? So very much in line with, you know, asking yourself, as well as, you know, in terms of career opportunities, what are those values? But it's also taking a look at who you are outside of your job, outside of your career. One of the questions that I used to ask my university students that I would coach is, you know, who are you as a person? like, are you a reliable sister? Are you, you know, a great confidant? Do you give good advice? Like, what are some things you would put on a personal resume that are not aligned with necessarily like job competencies, right? So I think kind of being aware of that has really helped me intentionally make steps to choose like jobs more recently, or choose where to spend my time. And I think, you know, it's fair now, you know, especially in any job interview situation, that you ask, like, what are your company values? But not only that, like, how does that actually manifest itself in the work? Not even just like the work that you will be doing, but also the work of like other departments on the team. What are the concrete things and examples that speak to how those values are lived every day? Because that to me makes more sense than looking at something that just sounds nice on paper. So I try to hold myself to that same standard as well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, being able to ask that question and say, and be able to feel though, as though I'm in a position where I can ask if you are living up to your values. And if I join your organization, will I be allowed and permitted to live up to those same values? Because so often you can join organizations where they tout inclusion or they tout honesty, integrity, and yet you can see where that's not the case. And then you may not be as encouraged to voice when that's not the case, or point out how things have to be different. So, you know, being in that place to be able to say, do you, also is a bit of privilege too. Like, you have to be able to feel confident in yourself and know that perhaps if this doesn't work out, I can actually go somewhere else too. So one of the things we wanted to touch on was around like this idea of privilege and power and the relationship when it comes to those things, when it comes to either moving through your career, being able to get into that space of being an entrepreneur, like claiming that for yourself. And what does that, like, how does that have an impact on who you are, how you are within your spaces of work, within the work that you do, within your career, you know, privilege and power. So what have you come across?
I think the idea of privilege for me, in my kind of personal experience, I didn't realize that I had privilege until probably this last year or two. And I'm actually kind of ashamed that I didn't realize that before. So, I mean, I'll just, naming some of my privileges, I speak English fluently. I, grew up, I was born in Canada, I'm able-bodied, for example. And so, understanding that now, but also comparing that to, perhaps folks that don't have a safe space or a platform or a voice, or maybe the resources or allies to be able to advocate for themselves or others, that has become very apparent in this last year. And I think for me, kind of how I said in my intro earlier too, it kind of lends to, I'm just so tired. Like, I don't want to not speak up anymore. So I want to use any privilege or power that I have to, amplify, the experiences of others, and, voice my concerns about, things and injustices that I see being done to other people. And I think in some ways, I've kind of always been like that, but I just didn't realize it. And maybe I just didn't have the confidence to fully go for it until more recently. But I definitely, I recognize that it's not something that everyone has the, safe space to be able to do. But yeah, I think for me, it evolved over working for a number of years now, developing that confidence and having other people believe in me as well.
Yeah, I think I would say the same. I think, I mean, I wasn't born in Canada, but just even the fact that like being able to get like a college degree, having a two-parent household, and living in different countries growing up, like those are things that just people don't get to have a cultural background or cultural experience, or being able to speak like multiple languages, like that is something that is very much that I think I didn't realize how important that was until a few years ago either. And the same thing, I think for me, once I started dealing with chronic pain, that's when I started realizing just like the same thing about like ableism and things like that. And I was like, okay, like if I'm experiencing this much pain, like how much more does someone who feels unheard in our society? And so I think that made me also open my eyes up to that and making sure that I'm more aware and being more inclusive in those areas. Yeah, so that's something I think right now that I'm trying to figure out what the best way to advocate for in the different areas of my life. And just even with Black Women Connect Vancouver, am I highlighting those voices too, to be able to be recognized? And so I'm trying to figure out what that looks like right now. But yeah, I'm definitely way more self-aware about it than I was before.
Thank you both for sharing so much. Yeah, I think it's interesting when we don't recognize the privilege that we have, because we all have different levels of privileges. When we start recognizing what it is that we have, and then we start saying, okay, I'm going to use this to then help others. Reminds me of a conversation I had earlier today with someone, and you know, it's that struggle of, do you speak up sometimes or do you not? And sometimes it's exhausting to constantly be the one to speak up, and you're like, but then sometimes depending on how we are made, we can't help but to speak up, right? It's kind of like, if I don't say something, it's like, it feels like it's gonna be worse inside of us, right? So thank you both for sharing that. I think it's pretty powerful. Yeah, I can't help but be honest.
We can create our own mold, and our journey, the way that we forge our own success for ourselves, that is what's okay. That is what's okay, good for us. That's, you know, that are creating that is what we're supposed to. Larry, what you're bringing up is a really good point in that, you know, white supremacy has impacted everyone, right? So even if you gain privilege as part of the BIPOC community from that system of supremacy, you're still impacted by that. If you are at a disadvantage because of that, you're also being impacted by that. So like one of the reasons why I love creating this space around all BIPOC folks is because we can be aware of that impact, whether, you know, as a benefit or not. And as Natty said, kind of create our own path. For me, I was born here, and so I kind of straddled that world of my parents being from Trinidad and Tobago, and that being a huge part of my cultural identity, but also walking down the street and no one thinking that I'm Canadian, right? So there's no one who's going to assume that I'm born here. I always get that question. And so it took me some time to realize that however I decide to be, that is my definition of being Trinidadian, of being Canadian, of being Shalima. That's my definition of it. And I'm now added to what that looks like. So what I really appreciate from the work that Natasha does with Kulti Collective is creating stories of different types of representation of people from the Asian community. And the same thing from Nataizya, you know, creating a collective of Black women who are connecting from all different aspects and all different backgrounds, perspectives. It allows us to see difference within our own community and make that the norm, and not, you know, trying to fit a mold of what white supremacy is telling us that BIPOC folks should be, right? So I appreciate that comment and, you know, like that call out to what that elephant in the room is, because we all are impacted by that. So, thanks, Larry.
Shalima, do we want to go ahead with our signature question at this point? Because we've got about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, so we're, you know, I just want to appreciate everyone for being here and just, you know, creating an open space for us to be ourselves. And so in true fashion of being ourselves, both Shelly and I are, you know, of Trinidadian heritage. So we have to ask a question here to our guests. And that question is going to be, what would you be today? A red wine or white wine? Or, Shelly?
A slow wine or a fast wine? Based on the music, soca. Fast wine,
you think about soca, whining to soca, are you a fast wine or slow wine? Or are you a red wine today or white wine today?
And why?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a slow wine. 100%. That's, I mean, like, or at least I try to be just, yeah, I'm just thinking of all the songs now that, that get me in the mood to, like, you know, focus, but also just make me happy and stuff too. I'm a slow one.
Love it.
Nataizya?
Definitely a slow wine too. Oh, why? I think, yeah, same thing with music. I used to dance growing up and I did a lot of hip hop and it was like a lot of fast movements, but then now I'm kind of like slowed down in life. So it's kind of like reminds me of that. Of like, yeah, it's just like winding through life.
But
I hear you.
there's a few other slow wines in our audience here, it seems.
Yeah, in the chat for sure. I think some of the pandemic might have increased that slow wine thought process, but then yeah, some people are still enjoying the white wines as well. A little wine o'clock. Hannah and I know about that, right, Hannah? Okay. Oh, on that note, I think this is where we're going to say our thank you for coming out. It's been such a full and wonderful conversation, and thank you to our guests for their contributions, their openness, their vulnerability. It's been amazing. And then for our audience, thank you so much for your participation and your engagement. I hope that you gained some great insight and also some just aha moments and just confirmation. That's the word I wanted, some confirmation. And Shalima and I are scheduled to do this every third Friday of the month. So next month we'll be doing another one. So look out for that as well. You can follow us on our social media. I'll put up the slide in just a sec. And I'm also going to do another plug because I can. So I'm going to throw it in the chat because I mentioned I'm volunteering with the National Congress of Black Women. We have our event next Saturday. So come one, come all. Tickets are only $20 for our Legacy Award. So I put it in the chat if you want to check it out. Shalima, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just thanks for coming. We look forward to seeing you again next month, and let's keep the conversation going. You could find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. We're going to be posting recordings as well in there. So yeah, please continue to be in touch. And one thing I've loved about, unfortunately, the pandemic is that there have been so many more virtual events where you can connect with people. So if you want to connect with other people here, please share your details in the chat, and we can continue to connect and have chats around this throughout the weeks before next one. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much. We'll ask our two guests to stay on while everybody else says their goodbyes. Thank you again.
Bye.
Enjoy your Friday. Have a great weekend.